are so many ideas about or surrounding the topic of gathering. And these come from many different sources. Some of them are ideas that one person or another have come up with, and it's sort of just echoed out to others and become part of this background set of assumptions, many of which are wrong. Others have come from history, from attempts that other people have made to do it. And all of them have failed. All of the ones we know about. And so that's an interesting thing, to think that you're going to do the same thing and get a different result. And of course, all of these have been at different times in history. But rather than attempt to cover everything in this topic, which would take at least an entire book, I'm going to zoom in and just talk about a specific idea, which is, what would it take to create a new county? So first, let's start with why you would want to do that. Among the list of benefits would be the fact that with a new county, you could have your own sheriff, your own jurors. So sheriffs are elected, and they are the rubber meets the road application of the law. If you have a reasonable sheriff, a constitutional sheriff, we'll say, that person, it's like jury nullification. It's a check and balance on government abuse. And if that person's elected, they have an incentive to, and of course they're from the people in a smaller group. And so there's much more accountability there. A smaller county in general has a lot more accountability. It's not going to be run by a bunch of career bureaucrats who are they're like-minded amongst themselves, but probably very differently minded than you. Then when you get to the jurors, you're talking about the county prosecutor, and then the judges, and then the juries. So if a jury is pulled from one of a normal American county these days, the population is vastly condensed in a city or one or more cities there. And so any jury is going to be pulled proportionally from that city. And again, you end up with a situation where they're not your peers. You're not judged by your peers. You're judged by a bunch of city people who don't think the way you do. Then you've got the huge issue of property tax. So a county, depending on what state and how much interface it has with the state budget, a county has the greatest leeway to reduce or completely remove property tax. And so let's look at one state. Every state has different laws, but Montana happens to have on the books already a law and a process for dividing counties. So it's a very simple process. You have to get more than 50% of the people who live in the new proposed county to sign a petition. Then it goes on to the ballot of the existing county, and more than 50% of people have to vote for it. That's, in a nutshell, that's all it takes. Okay? So here are the counties of Montana. And what I'm going to do here is make the case for why this is not going to happen in any sizable number of instances. Okay? So, and why it would probably take a lawsuit to succeed. A lawsuit with a judge willing to do something other than what the law says, which can happen, but it's very unlikely. So here are the counties in Montana. Now, I just so happen to have this website up that gives you a list of the numbers. Now, I told you the rules, so go away. So in order to assure that you can get more than 50% of the existing county to support the split, because by default, they're not going to want to do that. You're going to have to double the population of the county. So there's your first challenge, right? You have to assemble thousands of people who agree with you and will support this, and who won't make it as bad as where they came from. So let's start at the bottom of the list. So you can see there are actually some really tiny counties in Montana, which is surprising. If we go to Webo County, that's a huge geographical region, but there are only 910 people there, which is good. If you're trying to move to a place that you want to be when everything falls apart, that's a good thing. Okay. And of course, it's surrounded by sparsely populated land too. And here's another one. So that's Webo. Over here at Deer Lodge, that's another county. Now, I'm just going to tell you, if you don't know anything about Montana geography, these are the nice places. This is the nasty plains, ugly, like the middle of Idaho kind of territory. All right. So that's not great. Just windswept and bare. This is the forested, nice rivers and lakes area. Okay. So we're going to look at Webo specifically and Deer Lodge, just because there are a lot of counties and there's no time for all that. So let's start with Webo. It's got 910 people. So you can, on Zillow, you can actually type in a county in a state and it'll pull up that whole county. So look at this. There's like nothing for sale at all out on the farms. You zoom in. What you find is there's exactly one town in this whole county. Not surprisingly, it's called Webo. So this is what you have to choose from. There are a few lots. If this is going to pull up. Oh, that's a house. So they're cheap houses. That's a good thing, right? But they're also cheap houses. The biggest problem that you have in pulling in this number of people is actually not finding the people who agree with you. That's a challenge, but it's the easier problem. The other two problems that are much bigger is, one, there are no jobs there. In any of these places, there are no jobs. So the only people that could come are people who are willing to completely retool, which tend to be very poor people because they don't have anything to lose. And they also tend to be people who would not necessarily add a whole ton of value by coming. Those are separate things, but it usually is the case that if they're that poor, they have other issues, so to speak. The other issue is that people just won't move. They will only move if they see the move as something obviously better right this second. And of course, the main reason for doing all this is to prepare for things that are in the future. And so when people look to sell their house, they're looking for a house of at least as high quality at a lower price than what they're going to sell their old house at. And that's an almost impossible equation to solve. So let's look at Webo. Look how old and plain and nasty this house is. Okay, I don't even have to click on the pictures. You can already see. And people turn up their noses at that. Now it's dirt cheap, right? But most middle-class families in America today would not be happy with this small of a house, this old of a house. Okay, and we haven't looked at the neighborhood, but if we zoom in here, this is not the rural life. This is a town, okay? And it's an old, dumpy town. No offense to people in Webo, but like these are all super cheap houses, which is a good thing, but they're all right next to each other. There's no fields here, okay? Now, if you were a gazillionaire, you could probably come in here and convince an awful lot of people to move. But this raises another issue. If you get 910 new people moving in, what do you think is going to happen to these property prices? And this is something that's been seen in the past when people tried to do this. The property values go through the roof. If you wanted to buy out these people, there'd be holdouts. It's like buying out shareholders for a company. There'd be holdouts, and you're going to struggle to convince those people. So really what you need are tracts of land that you could buy for cheap and then build up. That's probably a better situation than trying to get houses in a town. But like I said, the good news is these places are really inexpensive, but they're old style houses and they're small. But there it is, right? And there's no work here. You'd have to start businesses here that somehow sold products to people that didn't live here. So whether that's manufacturing and you're shipping it out, or things that you do online, or whatever else, you're not going to be selling to people here. There's no money, right? So that's Webo. All right. Now let's look at Deer Lodge. So Deer Lodge is a much nicer place. And because of its proximity to, well, really any city, there aren't too many in Montana. But if we zoom out here, we could ask the question, where's the closest Costco? That's a good way of gauging where you are and how far it is. It's quite annoying that there's no map scale on this. I think anyone who has a map application and there's no distance scale should just be slapped in the face. But here's Helena. Here's Butte. They each have a Costco. Here's Bozeman. Those are the cities. These all have names, but if you drove through them, they're just tiny little places. Okay. Like Lincoln has a neighborhood grocer that's basically a convenience store. Same thing with Sealy Lake. Okay, Missoula's got a Costco. So here's the Costco triangle. Here, here, and here. Okay, just so you know where you are. And there's Bozeman. So proximity to Bozeman bleeds out property value. It's insanely expensive. Okay, it's like the up and coming Jackson Hole. And so it's poisoning everything around because people are commuting in and it's just a cascade of inflated house prices. But this is a nice place. If you look at it on a map, in fact, if we just look at these houses, you can see there's landscapes, there are trees and stuff in the background. So if we just, I'm clicking a random dot. So we have land. Here's 20 acres for 300,000, which is pretty dang good price per acre as far as Montana goes, especially if it's a wooded lot. You know, pretty, oh, this one's got water, even better. So, but what happens with most of these lots is that usually they don't have electricity. They always try to dress it up to, like, in a couple of years, electricity might be close to here. So I'm not seeing anything about it, but we'll check here. I don't see anything about electricity. Usually if it doesn't say, it doesn't have it. Yeah, there you go. So you're going to be off the grid there. Now, the grid can come to you over time. This looks like a pretty spot of land. What is this? Is that the neighbor's house, or they just didn't describe it? Okay, got some kind of... That's interesting, huh? Sell your wife on that. This looks like some kind of glamping setup. Interesting. Okay, anyway, you get the point. All right, so are you going to be able to orchestrate a mass move into this county? It's definitely more feasible than the other, but this is what you run up against. Raw land for like $300K. Nice sized properties, though. They're very pretty. Views and things. Or developed land for less than you'd pay in a lot of other places, but you're not going to have any farmland. It's just going to be a dumpy old house. You know, so a lot of these places that are potentials are going to look a lot like crummy houses in Salt Lake City and what they used to go for maybe 10 or 15 years ago, maybe more. Okay, so here's one that's pricier. What is this? Here's a new construction, tiny house. Anyway, you get the point, right? But same deal. So let's look back at, was this Deer Lodge, I think? Deer Lodge County? All right, so you'd have to convince 10,000 people to move there. Good luck with that. Oh, and by the way, just suppose that somehow you could do that, and just suppose that it didn't go amok because the people, you know, the more people you try to bring together, the more they're going to do crazy things and not do what you wanted them to do. What do you think the people who already live there are going to do about it? They are going to do everything they can to stop you because they don't want things to change. Okay? As a rule, they don't want a bunch of yahoos moving in and jacking up their property values and their property tax. Okay? So what you'd want, maybe opportunity is the opportunity. What you'd want is something separate that you could flood into and then split off from the main county and get the votes to do so. Or this area up here, which I doubt. If there's a lake, you can forget it. I don't even have to click here. I know all this is going to be through the roof expensive. Okay? But Crackerville, that sounds appealing. Anyway. So, if you look at these places, I don't have any idea what this. So, yeah, look how pretty that is, right? So maybe that ends up being the key, but you're not going to find like a 10,000 acre ranch that you can then subdivide, right? These are just little places. It's pretty though. Okay, so you get the point. Very challenging. So that's why I fully expect cities and counties, maybe even states, to divide. Obviously not all of them, and I'd say probably not even very many, but I think it's going to happen, and I know it's already happening. It's one of those easy predictions to make because it's actually already happening. It's just most people don't pay attention. However, obviously, no state has divided yet, but cities and counties are being divided. There was one, I think it was Baton Rouge. There's a recent deal where they tried to do it through votes. It was blocked, and so they sued and won. And I think that's what it would take, because I just cannot see people getting the votes. And if you're going to do a lawsuit, you need the money to back that and probably some PR as well. But I just don't see anything like this happening in the way that people imagine it would. And so it has to happen in another way. And that other way is going to be a response after things happen to weaken the control that the government has over the land of the United States. I hope I said that carefully enough. My point is, whether through natural disasters, invasion, diseases, a range of really unfortunate catastrophes, shortages with food or other goods, widespread economic calamities, whatever the case may be, some basket of things, I believe there will be at least regions of the United States that will become less governed. And it will be at that point that people collect in different spots, like-minded people. And this is very different than going through the route of our current national and local government. I believe that door is closed. And in fact, I believe it closed firmly during the Civil War. That long ago. I think since the Civil War, there's absolutely no chance of an independent, we'll say city for lack of a better word, an independent city rising up. And I think it's been proven multiple times that even before that, it wasn't going to happen because people tried and they failed time and time again. They were exiled by the local government and the national government. So that door, I think, is firmly shut. And it's a wonderful example of how people imagine in their heads pathways to outcomes. And this is at every scope of life. They imagine pathways to outcomes without bothering to walk through it in higher detail. And so they cling to assumptions that are provably false. And it causes a lot of problems. So if you think that the pathway from here to Zion includes creating cities of refuge that are operating in conjunction and under the banner of local and federal law and governance, you're smoking crack. How could that ever happen? It can't. But you probably haven't even looked into the process of how do you split a county in whatever state you're thinking this is going to happen in. It's not going to happen. Not in the way it would need to accomplish what it would have to. So, and you absolutely couldn't have it without that. There's no way. There's no way that a secular county, and I don't mean secular in the distinction of religious versus secular, but let's just say a status quo county, a county run like all counties are, with this consistent march towards outright socialism, which is what all of them are doing. This is why your property taxes will always go up amongst all the other problems. And you say, well, why is that such a problem? There are many, many, many reasons why ever increasing property tax is a problem, but let's just focus on one. Any of these places that people would move to, there's no work. So that means you're going to go from your sales job where you're making $250,000 a year and you get to goof off at home more than half of the day. You're going to go from that to having to work in a field all summer long picking green beans or weeds, or spinning wool so that you guys can make clothes for yourself. And I don't see a line out the door for that, right? But assuming that you could get the people to sign up for that, this farming communal kind of life, basically being Amish without the funny clothes, you're going to, in haircuts, I mean, you could have the haircuts if you want. You're going to have to convince people, you're going to have to find a way for people to live on very, very, very little money. And you can't do that while paying property tax. It can't be done. So, in conjunction, you might ask, okay, given all of this, let's say you're right with this, then what can people do before everything falls apart? Do we just sit around and wait for that? No. The point of it is to inform what you're aiming for. It's not going to be a county or a city. It's going to be what I would call a super family. In other words, you get yourself straight, you get your spouse and your kids straight, and then once that's all lined up and running, as it should, so you're aligned with what the Lord would do in your place, then you can find another family to maybe join forces, and go somewhere and try to figure out how to solve all the problems that occur at that scale. Because it's the same problem. It's the same problem that happens in you as an individual as you work through getting to the point where you're willing to align with God as an individual. It's the same problem that happens as you do that as a family. And it's the same problem as 2 families or 3 families. And it just continues to scale. So if you're early to the game, you can work out a lot of those problems early and be better equipped for whatever happens after that. If you just wait, the odds are high you won't get the chance because you'll probably die before that happens. And the other thing is it just is a lot to do. It's a lot of things that you can't see until you get into it. And so you'll need the time to work through those things. So there's some thoughts on that.